Everybody okay with that volume?
Yeah.
We have finally reached the 20th century technology to have cordless mics. By the time everybody else has, digital VR, we'll probably have something smaller, but I wouldn't count on being up to date. Normally I get up and with laughs about what's going on tonight, but that's Clarion's problem tonight, so I won't do that. So keep in mind the Locust Awards this weekend. Some of you guys will be going to that downtown. We'll be having a sign down there on Saturday. Next week, you will see the Harry Bookstore, because I have 4 events in 4 days. Tuesday, I believe, is Kids Johnson, second week of Clarion West. Wednesday is Rochelle Mead. Thursday is Curtis Chen and Jason Huff, both Northwest authors you should read if you haven't read them yet. And then Friday's that obscure guy named Ted Williams. So that's going to be that. Yeah. If you haven't read High Fantasy, you might not know who he is. That's all right. He's hit the New York Times bestseller list. He's a pretty cool guy, and he's funny as hell, so you should come check him out. Without further ado, I will probably leave a register open. The store closes at 8, so generally it's easier if you make your purchases before then, but I don't know if that's going to work with the Clarion crowd. So with that, I'm going to let Vicki take over, and here's the chair from Clarion West.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
We're good. Okay. I am the board chair of Clarion West right now.
But you have to keep it close to your mouth.
I have to keep it close to my mouth. Okay. I'm also a Clarion West graduate from 2009, and this is the 34th year of Clarion West, the annual 6-week-long Clarion West Writers Workshop. We provide a world-class residential immersive writing program to emerging writers of speculative fiction. We're great. We are really good. We're like one of the best workshops like this, and one of the only workshops like this. And we have amazing instructors who are also highly skilled, so don't look at me that way. It's always a privilege to show off the work of our brilliant instructors. Outstanding writers and teachers like Daryl Gregory at our public readings to the whole Seattle community. And I don't know I know this distance is coming in and out. Sorry, I'll get it. Many organizations and individuals work to make these readings possible, including the University Bookstore, the National Endowment for the Arts, Amazon.com, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, King County for Culture, the Seattle Public Library, and individual donors like many of you out there. Our readings continue through July 25. 4 are here on Tuesdays, except for John Cho's. That one, which is our 3rd reading, sidesteps July 4 and will be held here on Wednesday, July 5. Our 4th and 5th readings, July 11 and July 18, will be at the Downtown Public Library. We are happy to announce that the July 18 reading by Daniel Jose Older will start 1 hour early at 6:00 p.m. to include an hour of original and DJ music by Gabriel Tedoros, rising Seattle musician and CW graduate. I think a lot of his classmates are here tonight. Could you wave at me? So we're very excited about that, so please come if you can. Also, our biggest fundraiser of the year, the Clarion West Write-a-thon, is underway. Writers from all over the world sign up, set writing goals, and recruit sponsors to show their support by making a donation to Clarion West. That sponsorship is really important to us. Not just to Clarion West, but also to the individual writers, because you show your support for their work. We have 192 writers as of this morning. I don't know if it's gone up more.
197.
Okay, good. Participating in the Write-a-thon this year. I encourage you, all of you who are writers or even interested in being writers, to sign up, to consider signing up for the Write-a-thon. The sign-up's closed June 25, right?
Yes.
We're sponsoring 1 or more writers. Visit our website to browse writers' profiles, read excerpts from their books, learn about their goals, and sponsor the writer or writers who you want to encourage. There's so much going on. If you want to receive emails to keep track of us, please add your name and email list to the list on this clipboard, which I will be passing around soon. And thanks again for all your support. And I'd like to invite the workshop director, Neil Graham, to introduce Daryl Gregory. Thank you.
How's this? Is that okay? Okay. Thank you, Vicki. Tonight I'm delighted to introduce the snappy and clever Daryl Gregory to you. A reviewer offered a description of his writing, and it's been going through my head all week as I've watched him teach this foundational week of the workshop. I would also add that he's an impressive as well as snappy and clever teacher. He is the author of short stories, novellas, graphic novels, comics, essays, and novels. His works have been nominated for multiple awards and have won the Quafford Award, the World Fantasy Award, and the Shirley Jackson Award. Tonight we have the honor of being here for the launch of his 7th novel, Spoonbenders, and this is a week before its official release, thanks to Dwayne. We get it a week before the release. In a Spoonbenders review where it collected a coveted star at Kirkus, that reviewer describes it as a nimble and substantial novel, a skillfully written family drama that employs quirk and magic with grace. Please help me welcome the snappy and clever, and quirky and graceful Daryl Gregory.
This is at Dwayne height. Is there any trained musicians who can do this more effectively than I can? Oh yeah, this is going to go well tonight. Okay, step one, Clarion students, check your microphones. How's that? How's that?
Snappy.
Snappy and clever. I am so happy to be here. Not only teaching Clarion, which is a huge honor for me, because I attended Clarion East 29 years ago, back in Clarion, back in 1988. Oh. We didn't actually have any microphones. We just had giant horns that we spoke through. And I'm especially happy to be in Seattle, which is, as my friend Jack knows, this is the town that I keep threatening to move to over and over again. I love this town so much. That's not even pandering, and I will be pandering in each town I visit on my tour. But for you should believe it, though. I like Seattle because the people here are so gullible. And I'm really happy to be here at the University Bookstore because Dwayne keeps my books on the shelf. People, you writers out there, you don't know how valuable this is when your books come out and they're on the shelves for about a few weeks and then they disappear to the online world. To have a bookstore where people can walk in and find your books by accident is a wonderful thing. So thank you, Dwayne, for everything. I'm also happy I've just got so many friends in this town, but especially, no, I'm not going to say especially because then friends get really pissed off when you don't mention all of your friends. I want to point out one person though. So my first book editor is here tonight. So Fleetwood Robbins is here. My first novel. I'm so happy for her. And if you know the secret of Fleetwood, he's actually got a secret family history. Which is, he was part of a 1950s vocal group, the Fleetwoods, which I found at a record store in West Seattle. And actually, in this picture, Fleetwood looks a lot like the artist John Picasso. So if you look for him, the Fleetwood, thank you so much for everything. All right, so
The unplugged version.
this is the unplugged version. I think that actually refers to their medical status. They were eventually all unplugged. Yeah, I was going to, the book was up here, but I was going to point to it and say, look what a pretty cover it is. Oh, here we go. Here's the advanced reader edition. Yes, it's so lovely. If you if you buy the hardback back there, it's the cover. It's my first cover with embossing on it, so you get to pet it. It's a lovely thing to be able to do. Thanks so much. So this book is, it's about the amazing Telemachus family. And they are a family of sort of down on their luck psychics in Chicago in 1995. But parts of the story go back to the 60s when Teddy Telemachus, who's really a card sharp with no psychic abilities whatsoever, meets the love of his life, Maureen Telemachus, who's an honest-to-God psychic. He thinks she's the best scam artist in the world, but she actually can do... Her scam is that she can actually see across great distances. She's a clairvoyant. And they meet at a secret CIA sort of psychic recruiting seminar, which everyone believes I invented. Like, my editor couldn't believe that all this psychic stuff, all this government psychic stuff, actually existed and was funded until 1995. We spent millions of dollars funding psychics. So, I mean, how can you not use that in a book? And anyways, but it's a story about the Telemachus family, and they are briefly famous in the 70s when they travel around performing various psychic feats. And but this book takes place in 1995, and it's young Maddie. The first chapter is about Maddie, who's 14 years old, who feels like he's growing up 20 years after the circus has left town. He knows his family once was famous, but there's very little hint of it now. Most of them, his Uncle Frankie's in debt to the mob. His mom can't hold down a relationship because she's the human lie detector, and we know that will never work out in a relationship. And his Uncle Buddy is inexplicably digging back holes in the backyard. So I'm just going to read a short excerpt. This is from the first scene in the first chapter of the book. Matty Telemachus left his body for the first time in the summer of 1995 when he was 14 years old. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that his body expelled him, sending his consciousness flying on a geyser of lust and shame. Just before it happened, he was kneeling in a closet, one sweaty hand pressed to the chalky drywall, his right eye lined up with the hole at the back of an unwired electrical outlet box. On the other side of the wall was his cousin, Mary Alice, and her chubby white blonde friend, Janelle, probably Janelle. The girls, both 2 years older than him, juniors, women, lay on the bed side by side, propped up on their elbows, facing in his direction. Janelle wore a spangled t-shirt, but Mary Alice, who last year announced that she would respond only to malice, wore an oversized red flannel shirt that hung off her shoulder. His eye was drawn to the gaping neck of the shirt, following that swell of skin down, down, down into shadow. He was pretty sure she was wearing a black bra. They were looking at a school yearbook while listening to Mary Alice's CD Walkman, sharing foam headphones between them like a wishbone. Matty couldn't hear the music, but even if he could, it was probably no band he'd heard of. Someone calling herself Malice wouldn't tolerate anything popular. Once she caught him humming Hootie and the Blowfish, and the look of scorn on her face made his throat close. She didn't seem to like him as a matter of policy, even though he had proof that she once did. A Christmas Polaroid of a 4-year-old Mary Alice, beaming, with her brown arms wrapped around his white toddler body. But in the 6 months since Maddie and his mom had moved back to Chicago and into Grandpa Teddy's house, he'd seen Mary Alice practically every other week, and she'd barely spoken to him. He tried to match her cool and pretend she wasn't in the room. Then she'd walk past, sideswiping him with the scent of bubblegum and cigarettes, and the rational part of his brain would swerve off the road and crash into a tree. Out of desperation, he set down 3 commandments for himself. Number 1, if your cousin is in the room, do not try to look down her shirt. It's creepy. Number 2, do not have lustful thoughts about your cousin. Number 3, under no circumstances should you touch yourself while having lustful thoughts about your cousin. So far tonight, the first 2 commandments had gone down in flames, and the third was in the crosshairs. Janelle turned the page of the yearbook and laughed. Ooh, you love her. Shut up, Mary Alice said. Her dark hair hung across her eyes in a way that knocked him out. Oh, you want that big thing in your mouth, don't you? Maddie's thighs were cramping, but he wasn't about to move now. "Shut up," Mary Alice said. She bumped her friend's shoulder. Janelle rolled into her laughing, and when the girls righted themselves, the flannel shirt had slipped from his cousin's shoulder, exposing a black bra strap. No, a dark purple bra strap. Commandment number 3, thou shalt not touch thyself, began to smolder and smoke. 20 feverish seconds later, Maddie's back arched as if yanked by a hot wire. An ocean roar filled his ears. And suddenly, he was in the air. The studs of the slanted ceiling inches from his face. He shouted, but he had no voice. He tried to push away from the ceiling, but realized he didn't have arms either. In fact, no body at all. After a moment, his vision swiveled, but he felt no control over that movement, a camera panning on its own. The floor of the room swung into view. His body had fallen out of the closet and lay stretched out on the plywood. That's what he looked like? That chubby belly, that pimply jawline? The body's eyes fluttered open, and for a vertiginous moment, Maddie was both the watcher and the watched. The body's mouth opened in shock, and then it was as if the strings holding him aloft were suddenly cut. Maddie plummeted. The body screamed. A high-pitched, girlish squeal he had time to register as deeply embarrassing. Then consciousness and flesh crashed into each other. He bounced around inside his body like a super ball. When the reverberation settled, he was looking out through his eyes at the ceiling, which was now the appropriate distance away. Thumps sounded from the next room. The girls. They'd heard him. He jumped up, covering his crotch like a wounded soldier. "Maddie?" Alice called. The door began to swing open. "I'm okay! I'm okay!" He shouted. He launched himself back into the closet. From somewhere, the blonde laughed. Mary Alice appeared at the closet doors, hands on her hips. "What are you doing in there?" He looked up at her, the bottom half of his body covered by women's apparel, the topmost dress an orange stripe number that looked very 70s. "I tripped." "Okay." He made no move to get up. "What's the matter, Mary Alice?" Mary Alice had seen something in his expression. "Nothing. He just had a bad thought." "These are Grandma Mo's dresses. I've just despoiled my dead grandmother's clothes." He propped himself on an elbow, trying to look comfortable, as if he'd just discovered that 20-year-old frocks made the perfect bedding material. Mary Alice started to say something, then glanced at the wall behind him, just over his shoulder. Her eyes narrowed. Through force of will, Maddie did not turn around to see if she was looking at the empty electrical box. "Okay then," she said. She backed away from the closet. "Right," he said, "all good." The girls left the room, and he immediately turned and covered the hole in the wall with the orange gown. He began to rehang the clothing, a waist-length rabbit fur coat, a bunch of knee-length skirts, a plaid raincoat. One of the last items was covered in a clear plastic dry cleaning bag. It was a long, shimmery silver dress, and the sight of it rang chimes somewhere back in his brain. "Oh," he thought, "that's right. It's what Grandma Mo wore on the videotape." The videotape. Okay, we'll explain what the videotape is.
Thanks.
So the videotape is the taping of the Mike Douglas show in 1974, when the family was debunked and shamed on television by someone who looks, by the astounding Archibald, a character whose barely disguised form of James Randi. Anyone know who James Randi is?
Yeah.
Oh, my hero, right? In acknowledgments, I apologize to James Randi for giving aid and comfort to the enemy, because the Telemachus is actually a powers that sort of kind of worked. But it's the whole, actually a lot of the novel was based on James Randi and explaining how Uri Geller actually performed his tricks. Yeah, so I'm sort of, the opening epigraph is to Uri Geller, who's, I hope he's properly ashamed somewhere. So, right now, I'd like to do a Q&A, but I will give you the questions. Clarion students, don't leave anything to chance. There's nothing like awkward silence. So, all right, so here I have 3 questions. Who wants number 1? All right. I need someone for number 2. Oh, okay, good, nice beer. Number 3. Oh, thank you.
I thought you were going to ask us questions.
Oh. I'm suddenly acquiring performance anxiety.
Oh, you can hold it. You can.
All right, question number 1. You, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
I am a huge fan.
Oh, thank you for saying so. I'm prompted. I appreciate that.
And I plan on buying multiple copies. Will you sign all of them?
I will sign all of them, but if you bring up more than 3, I will write not for resale on the other one. So, yeah, they're perfect gifts for everyone who wants to pay too much for a hardcover book. It's really the perfect thing to do. Who's got number 2? Jenka.
Number 2. I hear you're teaching Clarion West this week. Do you really think creative writing can be taught? Those are his words, not mine.
Well, this is a debate, and when it comes to the question, can creative writing be taught? My answer is not unless I'm paid. Then it can be taught. Actually, so I mean, this is an ongoing question. Like, what are these people paying money to come to Clarion for, right? Because there's so many parts of writing that can't be taught. Really, it takes a lifetime of work. Because what you're sort of asking people to do is you're asking them to learn a craft for a thing that doesn't exist yet. I mean, every story is its own imaginary thing that could be totally different from someone else's. So how do you actually teach someone to create something that hasn't existed before? And so what you end up doing is basically here are a set of tools for building imaginary objects, and you hope that you give people enough tools to work with that they can build their own objects. But there's for a lot of the process, it still remains mysterious. And if you there are probably books in the store that will try to explain the one key to writing a book effectively. Go ahead and buy it. Those people need jobs too, and they need to eat. But I don't think there's any one way to do it, and all we can do, and all the people out there who've taught Clarion know that the most you can do is say, here are a bunch of tools you can use, and keep reading a lot, and keep writing a lot, and then have at it, and that's all you've got. I will actually take real questions too. I don't actually need, if we have real questions. I can just pause uncomfortably before we move on to number 3. Jill!
What's a story that you want to tell that you haven't figured out how to tell it yet?
Oh, why'd you ask me a hard question?
Any question?
Well, there's lots of, there is a problem where if you have something personally going on in your life, there's this question of like, how long does it take to turn that into fiction and annoy all your friends and relatives? Like, when can you start stealing from them? And when can you actually make it into something that looks like a story? So, not to bring the room down, but for example, my dad has early onset Alzheimer's, and so we're going through this sort of slow motion kind of disease where no one knows how much time we have, where he's still himself. But how do you turn that into fiction? I may never be able to tell that story. I don't even know what the tools would be to do it well. And so sometimes, and this is the nice thing about writing fantasy and science fiction, is that sometimes just the fact of something terrible can be turned into into some other kind of thing. It could be we have this genre where you can make metaphors concrete, and you can deal with all kinds of diseases. And I write a lot about neuroscience, and so maybe down the road I can take what's been going on and how I feel about it and put it into something. But I don't know I don't know how to do that yet.
What are you reading right now and why? What are you reading? Like what's on your
Oh, what am I
or on your
reading?
Kindle
Oh.
or whatever it is, and why?
I'm reading just about every fantasy book written in 2016. I'm on the World Fantasy Award jury, and right now I'm supposed to be reading a ton of stuff. So I've been reading, books have been flying into the house. I mean, they're just boxes and boxes of books. And you're definitely trying to, you're doing kind of a slush pile reader kind of thing, trying to find the books that'll catch your interest, and then you get really depressed when you find one that's terrific because you have to read it now. And the World Fantasy Award covers everything: novels, novellas, short fiction, art, lifetime awards, non-professional awards. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I'm not on the committee alone, thank God, and we're dividing up the work. But I've been reading a tremendous amount of stuff, and I take in the novellas to start with, to do the first reading of the novellas for the committee. And there's been a terrific batch of novellas. We've talked about some of them with some of the folks at Clarion that have just been great. And so I've been reading a lot of stuff. But in the novella, realm, like the one next week, Kidge will be here, and her novella, The Dream Quest of Velvet Bow, a Lovecraftian retelling, with a feminist perspective, because here's an alert: Lovecraft wasn't really good at women, or really anyone except for white guys. So it's just a beautiful book, and I just also read Victor Laval's Ballad of Black Tom. That's a great novella. So there's just a ton of stuff coming in that's fantastic.
Where do you get your ideas?
I need to throw something at Jack. Now, the best answer to this, of course, is like Stephen King's. Stephen King's answer was, "I have the heart of a small boy, which I keep in a jar on my desk." No, we've been having this discussion at Clarion. It's like, well, some of us have been talking about, how do you keep coming up with ideas? Like, if you feel like you've got no ideas. The thing that's helped me is to say yes to a deadline, and say yes to a theme anthology. And suddenly you will be forced to have ideas that you didn't know that there were stories in there waiting to come out. So the lesson here is, when in doubt, put a gun to your brain's head and make them spit out words. I'm sorry if that metaphor is a little harsh. I want to explain. All right, Ted Chiang's not here, right? He doesn't. All right, I can use this metaphor. So I was trying to explain to someone. If you're a new writer, if you're very lucky, there's a thing that will happen in your life where someone will come to you with an envelope of cash and a kitten. Spend the cash. Don't name the kitten. This is called a movie option. So take the cash. The kitten has a 99% chance of dying in 12 months. Don't get attached. Take the movie option money, take the TV option money, and move on. Nothing that I've ever had optioned has been made into anything yet. They're trying to make a TV show out of spoonbenders, but I was having lunch with the screenwriter because that's that's a sentence I've always wanted to say. I'm like, can I drive down to LA just so I can later say the sentence, "I had lunch with my screenwriter"? And then, and she's telling me all these wonderful things that are going to happen. And inside, I'm just thinking, don't name the kitten. It's all gonna die. So I think that was an answer to Jack's question. I think that was good.
Several years ago, as a side comment, you were talking about when you were writing Pandemonium, the difficulties you had while discovering how to write a novel. Are there some key things that you remember discovering writing your first novel on how to write a novel?
Oh, yeah. So my first novel took about 8.5, 9 years and was completely unsellable. Later, I cut it up into parts. Basically, I sold off the parts as short stories. The fact that these short stories had nothing to do with each other tells you what was wrong with the novel. I was telling someone today, I had this great belief that novels, the biggest lesson I learned is that I thought, after writing short stories, that novels were big enough to write anything in them. I could just put in everything: love, death, class warfare, random bits of technology, every stray thought I had during the writing of these 9 years. And it turns out they can't. You have to be as focused with novels as you are with short stories. We did an exercise in class today where we're talking about writing from the end. You figure out where you're going. Once you figure out where you're going at some point in your process, and then you have to build everything toward that end, or you'll just fly off in all directions. So, thanks, Charles. Yeah.
What are your work habits? Do you do like a certain number of works per day, and what time of day do you work best?
Yeah, so for years I had a half-time job. For years before that I was a full-time technical writer, then a programmer, and before that a teacher. And it was really hard to fit in time for writing, especially with small kids in the house. So it was really tough. And I'd write late at night. And then later I got to the point where we could sort of afford that I could work half-time as a programmer. And then I wrote in the afternoons. And that was fantastic because unlike what you think, programming a lot of times is a really social thing because you're working in teams, you're trying to figure stuff out. So that was the extroverted part of my day. And then I would go in the afternoons to a coffee shop and write every day in the afternoon. And it was really once I could write every day for that amount of period is when I finally started getting work done on a consistent basis. About a year and a half ago, no, I guess it was about a year and a month ago, actually, I was laid off from my programming job, which was one of the greatest days. I've been there 24 years, and I was praying for that severance package like you wouldn't believe. And so when it finally came, because I was a half-time worker who was also working remotely to a job in Pennsylvania from California, I was as far on the fringe of the corporate org chart as you could get and still be on the chart. And so when that came, I was like, okay, this is a signal. Spoonbenders had sold, and I'd just gotten a severance check, and I'm like, I'm now a full-time writer until the money runs out. And then I will be back probably on the market. So, but I try to write every day. When I'm working on a novel, I try to write every day. And I also use a spreadsheet I call the spreadsheet of shame. So the spreadsheet of shame logs my word counts every day, and when I fall behind, it turns red. Yeah, you're supposed to go, oh. Yeah, there's a lot of red on that sheet usually. So that's usually my pattern right now.
Have you read Moby Dick?
That's so unfair. All right, so look, I've read most of Moby Dick. So I'm a really good American lit teacher
So isn't it the weirdest book you've ever tried to read?
Yeah, well, it turns weird. It's like, but sure. And what I'm doing now is I'm turning the best parts. There's all these weird parts of Moby Dick. There's all these weird monologues that really maps really closely onto Lovecraftian kind of horror. And I kept going back over. So recently, I'm writing the second book in my YA Lovecraftian series, and I'm using all the stuff from Moby Dick. And I'm not reading the whole book again. I got assigned it twice, once in high school and once in college, never really finished. But so I'm going back through it, and as I'm going back into parts of Moby Dick, it just gets weirder and weirder. But there are some great weird dramatic monologues that I didn't remember the first time. There's a great part called The Sermon for Sharks, which they're expounding upon the nature of basically free will and sin through feeding chum to sharks. It's a very deeply odd book, and it really, if you want to write Lovecraftian stuff, Moby Dick is like a source material. Sure.
It seems that writing novels is half literature and half management. So as a part of the craft of writing novels, do you have any comments about managing all the bits and pieces that you've got, bits and pieces that want to take you off course?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, there's, it is, well, there's the management of just keeping, well, because novels are too big to hold in your head like a short story. You have to develop all these systems. I have outlines, I have spreadsheets, I have the spreadsheet in Spoonbenders, there's a lot of flashbacks, and there's every family member, and I have to keep track of what ages they are at every point in the book. And then I hose that anyways. It turns out that somebody had a gestation period of about 4 months between when their parents met and they were born. It's a miracle. This is something we're fixing it like the third copy edit pass at this point. So there's that kind of management stuff. But also managing the pieces of the story. And so one of the things I had to learn how to do is that there was no way to keep the whole thing in my head. So I would take pieces of it. If there's one particular storyline, for instance, one family member's story, I would open up a blank document and type it out, tell myself that person's story, just to make sure I remembered it and I knew what her emotional through line was, what she wanted, what she was trying to get throughout the book. And it's weird when you do that. You're writing along in a novel in a first draft and you think you're doing fine, and then you realize there are these big gaps in reasoning. One time I had in my third novel, I just had my outline, and then they go to Chicago. And I got to the writing, I'm like, why are they going to Chicago? I knew I had a scene set in Chicago, but there was no earthly reason for them to go to Chicago. This is when I started blaming Daryl, who's an idiot, for my current problems. Number 3, real quick.
Do you actually know how to bend spoons?
No, but I know how to bend forks. So I went to this seminar. I'll tell the story quickly because I know the store will be closing. We have to sign some books. But I went to this seminar where it was called a quantum spoon bending seminar. I was very excited because I live in California now, and this is a thing that happens. You can just go to these. And I went to the seminar, and he promised quantum spoon bending, and I show up, and all he's got is forks. But I learned how to bend a fork, and I don't have the utensil with me right now. I'd show you. But I'll explain the process. He said there are many different ways to bend cutlery using energies. The first one he taught us was to imagine a white light. This is the Arcturian light. He never defined what this is, but it's very bright, very powerful. And you imagine that light flowing through your body. And what he had us do was hold the fork out here in our hands and then try to bend it. And it was hard to bend. And then he said, close your eyes and try to just think of that energy flowing through your body. And because I was a spy here, because I wanted to see what everybody else is doing, I opened my eyes and look around at the circle of 16 people who are all holding utensils in their hands. And the woman across from me is bending the hell out of her fork. Then we all opened our eyes, and the teacher, Jean Ang, said, so how did it go for everyone? And the woman holds up her bent fork, and she said, I don't know, it flowed through me, and it just melted like butter. And I was like, this is amazing. And then we went through 8 different forks, and every time, by the end of the night, everybody could bend forks immediately. And it turns out that the secret to bending forks is just to bend the hell out of them, and then tell a story about it. And so I went there with my girlfriend, Liza Trombe. She's the publisher of Locust Magazine, and she was also there in spy form. And she had just sort of given up. At some point, we were like, okay, now I want you to picture the spin, the quantum spin, and then try to bend the fork. And she would just go, and then a woman in the circle was getting madder and madder at Liza. She's like, and finally this woman said to the teacher, and said, is there a way you can stop her from bending the fork? And he said, okay, let's try this. And he said to Liza, he's like, I want you to anchor the fork to the center of the earth. Not the surface of the earth, because there's been nuclear bombs and there's a lot of radiation, and so it can really disturb the energies. I want you to anchor it to the center. That sounded sciencey. I was into it. Because it did have the word quantum in the title, so I thought, this whole thing's based on science. So Liza holds the fork, and Jean says, are you anchoring it? She said, yes. And they said, okay. And then Liza took the fork and bent it, and the woman got very upset. So what I'm saying is, the power's in you. And the energy, it turns out the only energy you actually need is kinetic. So try this at home. It's a great party trick for people who like deluding themselves. So, and I really did want to apologize to James Randi, because I studied, James Randi discusses how Uri Geller would basically, just while people weren't looking, and sometimes he's caught on camera, just bending the hell out of it and bending it back real quick, and then showing you the bent fork or the bent spoon as he ratchets it up. And I was thinking it had to be a lot more tricky, but it turns out you could just tell people they have the power and they can do it. So that's the secret to fork bending. Spoons may be totally different. I have no idea. Mr. Rakutis, last question.
Would the quantum technique work on a spork?
Oh. I don't see, the spork is difficult because it's not till you open the box where you know if it's a spoon or a fork. It's the Schrodinger cutlery. I did not plant him. He just asked this question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think science still needs to research that.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Anyways, thanks everybody for coming. It looks like I'll be signing over there. That looks like a desk-like place with a chair. Anyways, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I love this town. So thanks so much. Okay, that works. I'm good. Oh, yeah, I should have said that.
Why am I the first person in line?
I'll just wait here lonely. Oh, I can sign that. Yeah, we should run a hand together. Basically,